All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our TAI's DEI Spotlight Series. My name is Molly Ross. I'm the Vice President of Operations here at the Technology Association of Iowa. In case any of you are new to TAI, the Technology Association of Iowa is a trade association supporting the technology and innovation industry here in Iowa. We have a vision of making Iowa the #1 state for technology and innovation in the Midwest. And we know an important part of that is ensuring that we have a diverse and inclusive workforce and industry here in the state of Iowa. And we have an incredibly engaged DEI committee here at TAI who helps us put on events like this one today, the DEI Spotlight Series, having conversations around specific issues and issues in the DEI space. So that brings us to today, the Disability Employment Awareness conversation. I learned about a month ago that October is actually Disability Employment Awareness Month. So what better time to have this conversation? I'm going to kick it over to our panelist and moderator today. Our moderator is Julie Clark, Managing Director of HR for Kingland Systems. And I'm going to let you take the conversation from here. Before I do that, I apologize. Before I do that, I do want to let everyone who's here attending today know that this is intended to be a conversation, and we know there is never any one right answer for a lot of these conversations, but we always want to learn from one another. So I encourage you all to take part, ask questions, share your experiences, and participate. So with that, now I will actually turn it over to our moderator, Julie, if you want to introduce yourself and our panelists.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you, Molly. And good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. I love seeing this large of a presence for today's session. So thank you. I'm Julie Clark. I'm the Director of Human Resources at Kingland Systems. We're an enterprise software company headquartered in Clear Lake, Iowa, with a large office presence in Ames, and then a number of employees dispersed throughout the U.S. I'm on the TAI Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, and really excited to be here today with Rachel Lunsford, who's with Iowa Vocational Rehab, and Megan Bygness Bradley, who's with 4 Kitchens. They are going to be our kind of guest speakers. I'm going to facilitate and have hopefully an interesting and insightful dialogue around Disability Employment Awareness Month and how we can better support and engage with people with disabilities in our community. So Rachel and Megan, welcome. Thanks for being here and being willing to present to the group and speak with us today. As Molly said, we'd love for this to be an open dialogue. So if anyone has questions, please don't hesitate or be shy to speak up or put them in the chat. We want to make sure this is beneficial for you and that we answer any questions or topics that you want to hear about. So Rachel and Megan, if you want to just kind of maybe start us off, get warmed up by talking a little bit about yourself, your role or past roles, and kind of what's led you to where you are today and why you're passionate about the DE&I space, specifically around people with disabilities.
Sure. So my name is Rachel Lunsford. I serve as the IT leader for our vocational rehabilitation services. We did become part of our workforce organization over the summer, and so we're still trying to figure out what we call ourselves some days. But for me personally, this is kind of a personal thing. It's twofold, really. I myself have ulcerative colitis. I didn't realize that it was considered a disability until a few years ago because it's just not the language that my doctor used when we talked about it. And really, you wouldn't know necessarily that I have a disease because or a disability because, at best, I just go to the bathroom a lot. And so you wouldn't necessarily know unless you're keeping track of that, which is a different conversation probably. The other part of working in Voc Rehab is on a personal level. My grandfather, whom I never got to meet, was a Voc Rehab counselor. So this is a lot like keeping it in the family. It's been fun to work with counselors and know that he did the same sort of work and get to know folks. I even see at least one of our counselors, I think, is on today. So, but I've always worked in the government space because I think it's one avenue for inclusivity and ensuring that we have equity when it comes to people who maybe don't have access to easy access to things that would help them. And so that's really how I come to this conversation today.
Hi, I'm Megan Bygness Bradley. I work for a web development agency that specializes in Drupal development called Four Kitchens. We're a fully distributed company, but I am based out of Des Moines. I'm our only Iowan, but lots of Midwesterners, and we have folks all over the country. And prior to this role as a technical project manager for 4K, which we specialize primarily in higher ed, and in nonprofit, which brings us a lot closer to the disability space. I worked for a company that managed most of the Drupal sites at the state of Iowa, and Rachel and I worked together for 3 years on many, many projects related to new sites for the state. And accessibility is obviously highly important in any website, but has a much stronger focus in government spaces and in higher education spaces. So that's kind of how I came into this conversation, and really excited to be here. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you both. So the first question that I have for you is, you're both in more, I guess, what we would call maybe more traditional kind of business operations roles versus a role that feels very kind of apparent that you're directly involved in the, organization supporting directly people with disabilities. So given this, how does the work that you do in your current role impact your clients, your employees, or the communities in which your companies serve related to people with disabilities?
A great question. Aside from the operational impacts of making sure that our counselors have the tools that they need, I serve as a resource to our counseling staff. I've had a lot of conversations recently with high school and college age students who are thinking that they want to do something technology, but their perception of working in technology is a help desk role, or maybe is something that is like a programmer or something like that. And so just last week, I got to have a really fun conversation with a student who we talked about there are so many other opportunities in technology and what that space looks like. And so our counselors often tap me in when they want somebody who can talk the technology side and talk about what those career opportunities look like. And similarly, on the other side of that is, if I hear from colleagues in businesses who are like, oh man, I really wish we had some support on Voc Rehab side of things, I get folks connected to our business services. So really, I try my hardest to be an advocate, even though my day-to-day job is really focused on our operations and our case management and all of that. I personally just like to make sure that we can really get a lot more of our Voc Rehab clients into technology jobs and get that those talents into our pipeline so that we can really get some really great folks.
Yeah, from my perspective, I actually am really more on the implementation side of things. So I'm working with technology teams, usually web services teams, to implement new technologies primarily for their websites, but also applications, and developing ideas, doing all kinds of things. Some things come as a result of a particular initiative, but others are very community driven, through feedback, through our testing operations. So it's all very directly public facing work that I'm involved in on a day-to-day basis, less so on the internal business operations side.
Thank you. Switching, I guess, gears a little bit in terms of my questioning. I think this is maybe something that a lot of us struggle with because we want to always say and do the right thing, but that's around language and terminology. And it feels like something that's ever evolving in the DE&I space, regardless of what the minority group is that we're maybe talking about. So what advice do you have for us around inclusive language and terminology? And are there phrases we should avoid, words we should avoid, just what tips do you have for us in that area?
Yeah, so I think this one's one of those where you have to be willing to be curious and learn and realize that it's not language is always evolving, right? We're always, I was just listening to a story on what Gen Z slang is and how they use words differently than even the rest of the generations do, right? And so language is always evolving. We often encourage person first language at Voc Rehab unless there's a cultural thing there. And so, you know, you would often say person with a disability. However, there are some areas and there are some folks who prefer that they are identified a certain way. So we have several deaf counselors here, and I've learned a lot through working with them and just helping them on their technology and making sure that their video systems are working, things like that, that they the preference is to identify as deaf first. And some of that is just that intellectual curiosity to say, well, I'm going to just maybe follow some content creators so that I can learn more about the culture around this, or I'm going to maybe ask more questions, and just try not to take it, you know, personal. If somebody corrects you, it's not necessarily because they think you are inherently a bad person. They just want you to know that this is the right way to say it, or that this is the preference that they have. And really it just comes down to, again, that it's not because you've done something wrong. You just have to live with that uncomfortableness a little bit, because we're all learning. We're all learning what how language shifts over time.
Yeah, I think the individual focus is very important, because I think the kind of background on this question, I think the implication here is that there is a right way, and I don't know that there is, nor should anyone really find themselves in the position where they're not engaging because of that fear of making a mistake. So sometimes it's easiest to just lead out with the direct question. And this is something, because I work in an open source technology community, these are conversations that are ongoing and constant. It's very much encouraged to ask people how they would like to be referred to as part of starting the conversation. So that's a really good way to avoid any kind of conflict or feelings of insult. I think the other thing regarding language that I found really interesting is that not specifically about person focused identification terms, but in terms of language as a whole, my company has been focusing on other linguistic patterns. We actually merged with a company who they were based in Costa Rica, and so we have a whole bunch of English as a second language colleagues, and we started to realize how idiomatic our day-to-day conversations were, and how many of the phrases that were normal kind of shorthand phrases we were using had violent undertones. So we've also been examining language that's either power structured or violence based, and trying to move away from that as well. And in tech, there's a lot of conversation around what do you even call the branches of code that you're merging. It used to be called the master branch. We don't use that term anymore. So there's all kinds of conversations happening in this space that you know, once you start to really examine, it opens up a whole plethora of questions.
And there's one more thought I had, Julie. If you're in a situation where you have an interpreter, and this is whether it's for deaf or either another language, the intent, you should always talk to the person you're talking to. The interpreter is just there to help with that translation or that interpretation. And I think sometimes it gets confusing because, you know, you may hear verbally from the interpreter, and so our natural inclination as a human is to turn to that person and talk to them, and that is considered rude. You should always talk to the person that you're actually talking to. I will say that I think we've done a lot of conversations like this as a team, and so that's also helped because I don't know about you, but I try my hardest to look at the camera whenever I'm in a conversation. But you know, sometimes you have your setup where your camera is just, you know, angled off to the edge, and so you don't even necessarily know that you're making eye contact with whoever. But in person, regardless of what the interpreter is there for, always engage with the person you're talking with.
Awesome. That's great advice. Thank you both. When we were preparing for this session today, I was kind of going back and forth with Rachel and Megan around questions and topics. And Rachel, you very graciously provided this article to me about person first identity. So I just put it in the chat for the group if you're interested in reading that. It was a really insightful article. So thank you for sharing that. And if anyone else on the call participating has resources they'd like to share, please go ahead and drop them in the chat. All right, so my next question, I guess, is geared more toward hiring people with disabilities. So I think for some, we might think about hiring someone with a disability as like a bagger or a stocker or a cashier at our local grocery store, versus maybe a more kind of high skilled type career job. So how can we view that differently and become more aware and really tap into resources that are out there?
Yeah, so I think this is one of those interesting things where we certainly have some really great partners in the state of Iowa that are really good about even just making sure that they are doing an excellent job at hiring in those areas, and they're very visible people, right? They are the people that are helping you get your groceries, or they're helping you in gas stations, and so that's one of those things. And going back to my earlier mention that I have ulcerative colitis, the likelihood is that there are already folks within your organization that maybe they have a disease or disability they haven't disclosed because they didn't really feel that it was necessary. And so you might already find that you have that, but if you don't know that you have folks in your organization with disability or chronic illness, that's an opportunity to examine your culture and say, well, why don't they feel comfortable telling us? For me, that means twice a year I have to usually go in for several hours of appointments, because usually one test shows something that they don't like, and then I go sit for the 3-hour test, and then that test shows I'm fine, right? And so and that's just something that I've gotten a habit of just disclosing to my my managers and the people who report to me, just to say, it's not that I'm not available, but these are the times a year where I'm part of that, that's part of what I'm doing. And so it's really examining kind of those values that you have as an organization to make it a more to make it inclusive, and to have some of that those hiring goals. When I was talking with our business services manager, the quote she gave to me is, you can't have diversity without inclusion. And that's like one of her, just every time you talk to her, when you look at the hiring practices, you also have to think about, what are you doing to make sure that job postings are inclusive in language? So one of the examples that always comes up is ambulatory. Does the job actually require that you walk somewhere, or does the job require that you move around the perimeter? And so looking at just the language usage and the job types that, or the job descriptions, can really be helpful of making sure that those jobs are interesting and inclusive to people who might want to apply for them. And the other area that I think of too, and I might ask Megan to talk a little bit more about this, is having accessible publications online really does make a difference, because if somebody can't read it with a screen reader or use other tools to help them, they might just move on. They may not make it their effort, or it may not be worth their time to really dive in and figure out if that's a company they want to work for.
Yeah, absolutely important to note that if you are, depending on the technologies that you're using, if you're using a third-party platform to do your job postings, wherever you're putting these things, if you're putting it out on Indeed, or you're making a post on LinkedIn or on Twitter or wherever, you need to make sure that what you're linking through to is not only accessible for screen readers, but you also consider all of the WCAG compliance factors, which include things like having the ability, like fine motor control, like little things that you may not think about, but vet your vet your technologies that you're using and make sure that they're actually passing the standards. And by the way, the WCAG standards are actually just about to change again to 2.2, and there are a lot higher level requirements now, and they're much more specific. Everyone's sort of getting their heads around what these things mean right now. WCAG is, it's a little difficult, and you may need to hire a company to help you with an audit of your technologies. But also things like that don't necessarily revolve around the technical back end of your application process, is even things like stating clearly in the job posting that that you would like folks to let them know if, or let you know if there's anything that they need as an accommodation for the interview process. Because this isn't just about getting down the road and saying like you're hired, you know, how do we accommodate you? There are lots of folks who are going to need different conditions for that interview process, whether it be in the way that they submit an application, in the way that they interview, the kinds of technologies that that might be required, or even things that aren't technology based that might be requested. So folks making it clear to them that you welcome them to offer you know, to ask for those accommodations, I think is really key. I think that shows a commitment on your part as an employer, and is quite attractive to folks who maybe aren't seeing that enough in their life.
And there's one other
Outside,
thing I can mention here too, Julie, is, and I know you and I talked about this a little bit, is that there are, at least in different areas, there are different pilot programs or actual hiring initiatives that focus on, say, neurodivergent and neurodiversity, because there are unique skill sets that folks that maybe have that come from that are in the neurodiverse spectrum, that, you know, they might bring something to the table that that we just don't typically think of when we're looking at candidates. And so the federal government has a big pilot in the intelligence community. They have a lot of folks that they have I think they hired something like 4 or 5 in the last couple of years, I think it was, but that they targeted for this program in intelligence because it was around pattern recognition and noise in the data, and actually trying to find the signal out of data and trying to understand what's coming in. So that actually makes me very happy to hear that we have some folks who are really targeting that on intelligence at the national security level, because that, you know, that means that this isn't impossible for anybody. This is possible. We can work together to you know, really hire high quality talent and that, you know, are just folks who happen to have a disability.
Megan, you mentioned the standards, and I think maybe an acronym. I'm assuming there's a website that
Sure,
would link
yeah.
to that. If you have that handy, would you mind dropping it in the chat?
Yep, can do.
Thank you. And then the other question that came to mind as you were speaking around, you know, being really clear about a company's efforts and intent around providing accommodations to people with disabilities, whether it's a candidate or a newly hired employee or a current employee. It feels like for candidates, we would hope that all employers have kind of that standard language. I know at Kingland we have the standard language, EEO language, and reference to accommodation. Are there ways that we can really go above and beyond, though, besides kind of this is legally required, so we're going to make sure it's in our job posting? Any thoughts or recommendations on that?
So
I think,
go ahead, Megan.
oh, I was just going to kind of circle back to what you had spoke about previously, Rachel, which is, you know, the culture, right? The culture of your company. And in the tech space, this is, I think, getting a lot more play than maybe other places, but people really care about the type of place that they're working for. They don't necessarily, you know, they're not coming just for the money. They want to be happy every day. They want to work for a place that shares the same values that they do. And so, you know, having clearly stated values that that point to a commitment to diversity and inclusion, not only things like disabilities, but diversity of thought and experience, and all of that, I think, is critical, right? So making it very obvious to folks who you are as a company, what you care about outside of the product or the bottom line, but what we expect from people just in general. At our company, at Four Kitchens, one of our core values is genuine relationships, and that ties in, on a daily basis in the way that we interact with each other, and it's part of our intrinsic culture to know things like people's history and the kinds of challenges that they're facing every day, whether it be a physical disability or chronic illness, or the fact that they need some accommodation to their time and flexible schedule because they have caregiver responsibilities, whether it's for children or other folks in their home. So it's not just about that employee necessarily, it's also about the people in their community and their priorities as well. So really focus on your values, and are those values and what you care about as an organization attractive to folks and the kinds of lives that they want to lead.
Business services team gave me a few examples of language they've seen that is helpful when job descriptions are posted. So, one is we actively hire individuals with disabilities and provide reasonable accommodations and assistive technologies. Just calling out that you value that as a company. And sometimes I think, especially in the vein of language matters and words matter, I think sometimes we get it becomes really easy for us to overly complicate the words that we're putting out there because we want to be as broadly inclusive, which is good, right? We do want to be broadly inclusive, but if you know that this is a job you want to hire for folks with disabilities, there's no reason why you can't be very crystal clear about the culture that you have in your organization. I actually really liked another one. It's your entire experience starting with your application is designed to be the beginning of an inspirational journey where you are treated warmly and with transparency, dignity, and respect. That's, I want to apply for this job and I don't even know what it is. Yeah, just because the message is so welcoming. It makes me feel like I'm already part of the team, just from the start.
Awesome. Thank you. Really good advice. Appreciate that. The next question that I have is around remote work. So obviously COVID pandemic, a lot of companies went to fully remote where it was possible for their workforce. And now there's this kind of slow creep of return to office. What have you seen in your worlds or experienced around remote work impacting people with disabilities and employment?
So the really cool thing that happened in last year's reporting for Bureau of Labor Statistics is that we saw that persons with disabilities employment number was the highest since they started measuring in 2008. And it was around 23.1%, I think it was. And so, I think we can attribute some of that to more flexibilities around remote work and more flexibilities around just even having not just remote work in the sense of I live in Des Moines and I work from my home, but like Megan, she lives in Iowa and she's the only teammate in Iowa for her company. And so, those sorts of flexibilities certainly help hire the best candidate. It makes it easier to recruit folks when maybe they don't have to move. That there can be some pretty significant barriers depending on who you're hiring for transportation or for moving or that sort of thing. So offering that not just as an accommodation, but just as a general practice of saying, well, we do have hybrid. We do just require that people come in for the big strategic planning meeting or things like that once a quarter, once a year, whatever it is. And I think again goes back to those values. If you value having the diversity within your organization, then that would enable you to go back and say, well, do they actually have to be in person 100% of the time to be successful? If it's a role that requires that, then, you know, there's still opportunity for hiring people with disability. It's just a different looking conversation. But if it's something where giving them 100% remote option to work, and they're an awesome employee, they're stellar at their work, you know, the big upside to the company if they are able to either retain folks with disabilities because of that, or, you know, hire really stellar candidates. So I know the conversation around remote work is, I think, I heard that it's the most contentious in the United States. The rest of the world has come to some agreement. We're the only ones that are maybe a little bit contentious about it. And I think that conversation is just going to continue, right? Because there are benefits to being in person, but there's also a lot of benefits to not being in the office, right? You can take care of your family members if you need to help them get to a doctor's appointments, or you can easily skedaddle to your own doctor's appointments if you're just at home instead of trying to get completely packed up at work or things like that.
Yeah, Four Kitchens is a 100% distributed company. It was originally based in Austin, Texas, but about 7 or 8 years ago, so far prior to the pandemic, they realized that we're hiring for such niche skill sets that it no longer made sense to retain an office, because they were down to maybe 6 or 8 people who were showing up in the office. Even the folks who lived in Austin were like, I'd rather just stay at home. So they went completely distributed. And what that has meant for our company is that we can hire the absolute best candidates regardless of where they live. We have people in every time zone in North America. We have a whole third or so, 30 to 40% of our team who are all based in Costa Rica. We've got a couple people in Canada. I have a few people in Europe, and I also have one coworker who is he is now a digital nomad. He has no home, and he's just traveling around the world. So we're able to offer that kind of flexibility to our employees, but it's also a competitive advantage to be able to find the best people. And I think also in terms of what is remote work meant for folks, I mean, I do know people before the pandemic who had a significant increase in their chronic illness, and it became difficult for them to get to the office, and so that led to them no longer being employed. That's a question of what kinds of reasonable accommodations were made in that situation. That's another whole conversation entirely. But had that job been remote, it never would have come up to begin with, and it easily could have been performed remotely. So it gives it's very easy to give the reasonable accommodation in the world with the technology that we have to be able to stay at home if that's where you can do your best work. We have a lot of neurodivergent people in my company as well. And for some folks who have, for example, ADHD, working at home is amazing for them because it provides them with a level of focus that you don't necessarily have the ability to control when you're in an office with lots of other folks who may be coming in and out and disrupting your train of thought, which for normal people, I think I read a statistic just the other day that said once you're disrupted, it's like 23 minutes before you can get back into deep focus. For someone who's struggling with ADHD or some another similar issue, that's obviously going to be even more exacerbated. So I think there's so much that I've noticed even for myself of just being able to focus as a result of being home. So lots of advantages that I see, and hopefully we will get past this in the US as well. But lots of places, especially in my niche field, that have gone fully distributed. We don't need the buildings anymore.
It's completely unrelated, Megan, but I'm curious what your HR and compliance people, how they're handling the nomad and the
oh yeah
taxes.
There's it's kind of complicated, but we actually have a whole, there's like companies that just handle this stuff for you, where they set up all of the different tax arrangements. It's like a third party HR type situation. So you're not really based in, like, I think our actual company is technically based in Oregon. It's a like a mailing service type thing. And then everything else is just kind of done through this HR company. It is a little weird though. I know
That's
it's
good to
a
know.
lot of paperwork, but they handle it, and they specialize in it. So
Huh.
it's
Okay.
great because we get the best people that we can find wherever they happen to be. And for
Yeah.
folks in Europe, if they want to work, at night and overlap some of our hours. So that's another whole accommodation thing.
Yeah. All right. I'll have to ping you offline to get that company name.
Sure.
It's, I think, just my own kind of commentary around this that your comments kind of sparked was with, I think at Kingland, kind of before COVID, being in office meant something very different than it means now, right? So it was like 5 days a week, pretty much 8 to 5, right? With a little flexibility on each end. And now we haven't done a full kind of return to office, but we're trying to get more people to want to come into the office. But we've had to be flexible and say, yeah, we want people to come in. We want to start to get back together, in on purpose as with teams, but it looks different than it did 3-4 years ago, right? There's a lot more flexibility. There's a lot more ability to kind of break up your day as needed to attend to personal situations, whether it's family or health or something else. So that's been an interesting shift, I think a lot of companies have been experiencing. So, all right. What are some of the competitive advantages of hiring people with disabilities?
Yeah, so I've over the summer there was a Harvard Business Review that actually really articulated a bunch of they've done some studies and some research around this. And I had remembered reading it after we talked, Julie, but one of the things that stood out to me is they really talk about how hiring folks with disabilities brings about new perspectives and new talents that just add to your culture, really enhance that ability to have a more collaborative and productive culture, because that inclusivity just bolsters everybody. Everybody feels better when they feel included. And so there are some some things to think about when you're thinking about your company culture and your and how it, or your IT organization's culture around, what does that inclusion really look like? What does it mean when we have different talents on the team? How do we make sure that they're actually included in a way that adds to the bottom line? And so, the other thing that stood out from this research I thought was interesting is that for people looking to leverage capital, many of the venture capital firms are looking for things like diverse hiring practices, and they do want to understand how companies are looking at the ESG, right? And they want to understand that you as a company have thought about how to bring in those diverse sources of talent and skills. And so I'll find the link. I don't know that I have it up right now, but I'll find the link and share it. It certainly was an interesting perspective from Harvard, from that business review of just the thought that this makes your culture just that much more interesting to people, that they want to invest and they want to be there.
Yeah, I keep coming back. I'm not the idea of competitive advantage. Like I don't know exactly how I feel about that language. However, I think it's just this idea that you're hiring the best people, right? The right person for the right seat. And someone's disabilities or differences, neurodivergence, etc., is sort of, it's part of who they are, and it's what they're bringing to the table. I don't know, the tech space is just, we're ideally positioned to hire people of all kinds, all sorts, abilities, disabilities. And so I and I don't think that we have some of the barriers that other industries might, right? And we're not talking about whether or not someone can lift 50 pounds, or as Rachel mentioned, things like ambulatory, like can you walk 500 yards or whatever. We're not really dealing with that. We're dealing with people, especially if you embrace a remote work culture, who are already in a place that is set up for them, and they've already provided their own accommodations, most likely, or the accommodations are already built in because we work in the tech space and we're building these tools for ourselves, right? We're at the ground floor. So I think, most of the things that companies may shy away from, or see as like a cost or some kind of internal, not necessarily financial cost, but an internal cost of some kind, a lot of those barriers just don't exist in this space. It's pretty easy to just find the right person for the right seat.
Thank you. There's the job accommodation network. I'll put it in the chat. I've got one more question before we open it to Q&A, because we're almost about 15 minutes left in the session. But one of the topics I was going to ask was around resources for reasonable accommodations. So if you have any ideas or thoughts on that, would love to hear it. If anybody has resources they want to put in the chat, I was going to throw the job accommodation network out there. But last question, and then we'll open it up to the audience for Q&A if they have anything that they'd like to hear from you about, is just if we want to educate ourselves more and we're interested in this topic, what are your favorite books, podcasts, I don't know what else, shows, resources, websites? What are your favorites where we can educate ourselves more on this topic?
I feel very lucky because I do work in Voc Rehab. So whenever I have a question, I ask my colleagues. But the cool thing is that resource is also available to our businesses in Iowa. We have a business services division, and I can just give you a small list of the things that they can do. They can do things like training and sensitivity, awareness, and inclusion. They can come and do job description reviews. They can even give advice on some of the federal tax credits available for different hiring initiatives. They can help with, which really is helping folks on both sides of the table figure out how to help our folks be successful. And they can also do ADA consultations. So Great Plains ADA is another great resource for just understanding what sort of accommodations are out there. The folks that work there are fantastic resources. There have been times where I've been trying to figure out, okay, well, we need to set up something new for maybe our deaf counselors or some new technology. And they've just been really good at even just saying, oh, we've seen this problem before. This is how we've solved it in the past. They also do ADA, I think it's called ADA coordinators. They have training for that you can use, that you can go get folks certified so you have your own ADA coordinators on staff. So there's lots of great resources at Voc Rehab, and our counsel. I don't know. I see Melissa Silver, who used to be a Voc Rehab counselors on. There are a lot of really just knowledgeable folks that you get a hold of us, and we'll help you learn just about anything. There are times where I have to say, okay, I have 5 minutes. What can I learn from this? On a personal level, I've just tried to set up as much as I can in my own social media feeds of just those diverse folks, all backgrounds. There is a person on Instagram that I like to follow called Equip Me OT. And she shows the different sorts of tools that you can have for home modification to help you with just different, if you need assistance getting in and out of the shower, things like that. It's been great as, I've moved through seasons of life to help my grandparents or to help, even myself as I'm starting to have different disease expression, things like that. And so there's lots of content creators out there that I think just help you understand culture and help you understand those things and just give you a perspective that you just wouldn't have an opportunity to understand otherwise.
Yeah, I second. Lots of great content creators out there and lots of amazing personalities, and even just learning about how people handle their day-to-day is kind of a cool thing. One thing I would recommend to folks, and it's something that we did at Four Kitchens and has been really awesome. Rachel's brought up tons of great articles today, things that she's read recently or in the past several months, providing a Slack channel, if you use Slack or if you're on Teams or whatever, a dedicated spot where when somebody reads something really cool or they listen to that great podcast that would be of benefit to everyone else, there's a great landing spot for it, and it's there, and it's all, you know, searchable where people can go back to it when they have time. That's been a really awesome resource for us in general to share with one another and pass along these important things that we're finding out. So highly recommend that.
Great. I love that. It's a great recommendation. Thank you. All right. Does anyone who's in the audience have questions? You can speak up in the chat. Awkward minute of silence. Molly, are there any closing words or information that you have?
Well, real quick, I see Melissa turned her camera on. Did you have a question, or go ahead, Melissa?
Yeah, I was going to raise my hand. I didn't want to be rude and just blast on the scene, but Rachel knows that that's exactly what I would do. So, excuse me, what has been the most surprising, I don't know if I want to say experience, but just in onboarding people that experience disabilities or working with people with disabilities, that's been the most surprising, that you didn't know what to expect, but something surprising happened, and it really worked out the best for you, your company, and that particular job candidate or employee.
So I'll just share a little story. I don't know, Melissa, if you know this, because I can't remember when you left Voc Rehab, but I have make it a point to try to bring on technology interns as we can that come from our job candidate, our client within our organization. And we had this one individual who was not excited to interview. They were not excited to even have a conversation about this, but their advocates really said, at least talk to Rachel. She will help you think about what you could do. And when we really got into the conversation, I said, well, what is it that you want to do? And it turns out that they really didn't love the idea of having to talk to people every day, but they loved the idea of software implementation or working in the background. And so we got lucky. We had a project that we really needed help on that was, probably took them all summer to just work on the implementation in the background. But we would have daily or weekly check-ins, whatever was appropriate for the project. And that person just really bloomed. They suddenly realized that work was not serious all the time, that you can have fun and that you can really build relationships with your colleagues and have a good time while still getting work done and still getting paid for it. That was like a novel concept for them. They're just gonna like, wait, I don't have to be buttoned up serious all the time. It's like, well, we'd prefer if you weren't, because this is, pretty dry stuff. So we gotta have some humor in technology if we can. And so by the time their internship ended, it was one of those things where they were like raring to go. They were like, how do I get a job now? What is this thing that I can do to go work for somebody? Because this was actually way more fun than I thought it would be, and I want to find the place to be. And so I think if there's any stories I could ever tell, that's the one that just made me feel like I actually made a difference. Because work can be a drag sometimes, right? But to help somebody realize that we're all in it together and we're gonna persevere and we're going to get our job done and we're going to laugh about it, or we're going to talk about the latest technology and talk about why maybe a folding phone isn't a good idea or what have you. It was just a great time, and I'm just really happy that that made them very excited to be and maybe they work for one of your companies now. It was one of those really cool opportunities.
Yeah, it looks like Kirsten also has a question in the chat about knowing that colleagues aren't getting support. And my answer kind of ties in to your question, Melissa, ties in to that, which is part of the whole thing is just, you know, opening yourself up to learning about folks, and some of it's just like not even considering or thinking about small things. I have a colleague who is deaf and has a cochlear implant, and we went to DrupalCon this past summer, and a part in her cochlear implant broke the day that she got to Pittsburgh from Costa Rica. So, you know, it's things like preparing ahead of time, or even thinking about the fact that there are things that you may have to consider. Like it didn't occur to me that we would need to maybe pre-vet a place where she could get her implant fixed, that kind of thing. Like it's just, I guess it's a little surprising. It was surprising to me how on top of your own game you have to be if you are reliant on a technology, right, as part of your accommodation for your hearing loss, things like that. So some of it is just like asking, right, asking that individual, like, what else can we do to help? Are there things that we can do, even if it's is there a way that I could help to facilitate a conversation, or bring it up in a bring up your disability or concern in a way that, you know, isn't personally identifiable, so that we could have a larger conversation about this. Sometimes people don't want to be singled out, so even just helping them by voicing a concern in a more general way can be a huge help to folks. So yeah, just get to know the people around you and care about helping them, and thinking about like the same thing that you would do if it was your family. Like, what do I need to do to be helpful to this individual today, right? Or to help prepare them and take some of the burden off. That's stuff that we will definitely be doing for my colleague in the future, because we're here to do this stuff as a team.
That's a really good reminder, Megan, to be kind of proactive in communication and things like that, like travel. I mean, at Kingland, we've hired a number of employees over the last few years who have never had to step into an office to interview, to work, right? We hired them fully remote, and they work fully remote. And so if we ask them to travel for their job or come on site, we should really be proactive in, you know, how we communicate, and ask ahead of time if there's any accommodations that they might need or support that they need. So thank you for that. That's a really good
And
reminder and piece
incidentally,
of advice.
I didn't even know that my colleague had a cochlear implant until she brought it up, because she's in Costa Rica and I see her on Zoom calls and it's completely hidden. You would never know. So there's definitely has to be proactive communication if you're going to try, especially if you need to accommodate someone for something as important as, like, you know, travel, where they could be really out on their own.
Kristen, just following up on your question, because it looks like you added some additional commentary there. If you have an HR department or person, I would strongly recommend going to them, or you know, maybe escalating to someone who you confide in that's a leader in the company, because if that behavior is happening, I mean, that needs to be addressed. It's not only is it, you know, not good for everyone involved and bad for business, it's a legal risk too. I would say, again, I have zero details and shouldn't even be advising, but I think just escalating and helping that individual escalate would be really good. All right, we are just about out of time. So thank you so much, everyone, for your participation and for listening in. And Rachel and Megan, thanks so much for being willing to respond to all my questions today.
Happy to join.
Yes, thank you all. Thank you all so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you, Megan and Rachel. Thank you, Julie, for leading the conversation and for everyone joining. I know everyone is running to meetings because this is how we live these days, but for those who are still on, if you want to be a part of these conversations going forward, certainly keep an eye out on your emails for the next one, but also encourage any of you to take part by joining TAI's DEI committee. It's just a monthly meeting where we talk about what we should talk about next and try to continue the conversation. So you're all invited. You can find more information at technologyiowa.org. And also, I would be remiss if we didn't mention the next couple upcoming events. Hope to see many of you at next week's Prometheus Awards, our biggest event of the year. And also our next Tech Brew free networking opportunity. We have a monthly interview technology executives. The next one is November 9th and will be featuring Joe Reesberg, CIO at EMC Insurance. So hope to see you all soon. Thank you so much for being here today. Let's keep this conversation going. And thanks again for Julie, Megan, and Rachel for taking the lead.
Thank you.
Thanks, Molly.
Thanks, y'all.
Have a great day.